Well, welcome, my friends, to the Be the Solution podcast. I am excited this morning to welcome Diaz. He is the founder and CEO of Eric Diaz Law, minority owned guerrilla law firm which serves as a fierce advocate for small business owners and entrepreneurs, particularly in the Latino and underserved communities, with a focus on business, contracts, commercial real estate, and finance. Today, we're going to dive right in with Diaz. We're going to talk about small business owners and not getting blindsided in commercial leases, which, in fact, if they don't have the right representation, they really could be in a lot of trouble and lose their business.
Good morning.
Welcome to Be the Solution, Diaz.
Thank you very much. Appreciate you having me.
Well, let's rock and roll right into it this morning. So You represent clients who mainly on the commercial side, but small business owners we're going to talk about today, and the challenges of being a small business and navigating through these commercial leases. I know it takes a very long time to get a commercial lease done because there's a lot of going back and forth, and landlords generally want a lot of things from small business owners that it makes it difficult, quite frankly. And I only could say that because I've been through it. What are some of the things that you're seeing and that you've experienced?
Well, I think the most fundamental issue is that folks do not understand what they're signing. And oftentimes, particularly focusing on small business owners and entrepreneurs like me and you, for example, and the folks that we work with a lot of the time, small business owners have a lot going on. They're one woman or one man bands, a lot. They're juggling, and they found a space, right? This is the scenario they're in. They have found a location that they like and that is useful for their business. And now they have to deal with this lease and they have no idea what it says. And the landlord will typically say, or whoever they're dealing with, if it's a broker potentially, it's standard. And it'll often say standard on it. But standard is not the same as favorable to the tenant. It's not the same as fair. It just means that that's the one that they always use. That's the form they always use. And because of the language in the lease, the person signing it doesn't really know what they're getting into. So there are hidden landmines in those lease terms that if you get blindsided by them because you didn't understand what you were signing, you could lose your business. They could be as simple as the delivery date. What the hell is the delivery date? That's the date that the landlord is going to deliver the premises to you. And it's supposed to be in a condition that you can move in and use or however you negotiated it. But that's something you need to be thinking about because as a small business owner, you're projecting that you're going to start your business on a particular date. And if the landlord doesn't deliver the space on that date, you're standing around not making any money, but you could potentially still have to pay the rent. So the delivery date is a very important provision to be looking into just to get the ball rolling, just to get in and get started. We've had folks who there was no set firm delivery date and the landlord didn't deliver the premises. Two years later.
Oh my gosh.
2 years later, this guy's sitting on the sidelines, right? Investors, this is a ripple effect throughout. Right? The small business owner doesn't live in a vacuum, as you know, right? So they're connected to investors and to potential employees and partners, et cetera. Everyone's waiting for this delivery of the premises to occur and never did. And the landlord is threatening him with default for not paying the rent. And
how can you pay the rent if you don't have the space?
Exactly. How can you pay the rent if you don't have the space and you're not operating your business and you're not generating revenue? Landlord doesn't care, right? Because in the lease it says you're obligated to pay rent by a certain date.
Sure.
And that's not tied to the delivery date. You're obligated to pay rent. It doesn't make sense, but it's the way the lease is written. And you say, well, I'm not going to pay the rent. I'm just going to break the lease. And people like to say, I'm breaking the lease. Well, breaking the lease in legal terms is breaching the lease. And that makes it a default under the lease, which are these all legalese terms I translate for folks. And I put them into bullet points. It's one of the reasons why we call ourselves guerrilla lawyers. We use unconventional tactics like translating the language so the client understands. Oh, I didn't realize that. And if you don't pay the rent, the landlord can accelerate, they call it, which means all the rent for the entire term. So if it's a 5-year term, that's 60 months. Just say it's $1,000 a month, just for easy math. That's $60,000 that you now owe today.
Yep.
If it's $5,000, that's $300,000 you owe today because of no fault of your own, or that you didn't understand what you were signing.
I'm well aware, and it's a shame that people don't understand that it's not like a residential lease. There's a lot more involved, and it's very, I would say, much more sophisticated than most of these people are used to dealing with.
Absolutely.
It's like we know our business, whatever business we're in. If we're a good operator, we're good at what we know our business. We don't necessarily know accounting. We don't
Exactly.
necessarily know all these other things. Most people don't get in the business to say, "Oh, I want to get in the business because I want to deal with the accounting all day, or I want to deal with, finding space and leasing the property all day."
You
These
want to
are
run your business.
nuances.
Yeah. And you wouldn't operate on yourself, right? But what happens is small business owners, right, they're used to playing a number of different positions, so to speak, right? They play a number of different roles in their business necessarily, at least at the beginning, until we were just talking about this, until we can hire someone else to do it, right? So here comes the lease. It's just something else for the small business owner to do. It's standard. Well, what am I going to do? Not sign it, right? I'm certainly not going to read it because I don't understand the language. So you sign it and you don't understand, you don't realize what you're getting into. And you're absolutely right about the difference between commercial and residential. And residential, you're dealing with the consumer basically, and there are laws that have been passed in order to protect the consumers. So there are consumer protection laws on the residential side, and there's housing considerations as people are living in these places. When you're in the business world, in the commercial context, big difference. Those protections don't exist. That's why you need to have someone help you through.
A lot of times, too, for some of the smaller commercial leases, you have a lot of the blind. I call it the leading the blind.
Right.
The people handling the lease don't know. That's what we rarely do retail. We don't do any office leasing or anything like that. We stay in our warehouse. We're on the sales side, and we sell stuff. But the leases, it's a different world. I even had my own to redo just now, and it took an enormous amount of time for something that should have been completely simple. When I'm talking months of going back and forth, and a lot of it was sided with the landlord. And we said no. We've been a tenant there, actually a subtenant, for 9 years. Well, it's like we're extending this for a year to you now. It shouldn't be that difficult. We're proven, right?
You would think.
We've been here for 9 years. We pay our rent every single month.
Incredible track record, which should carry a great deal of weight because, and don't get me wrong, I'm not anti-landlord. I represent landlords as well. And you're absolutely right when you say the leading the blind sometimes, especially when it's a smaller landlord and a smaller tenant. Like neither one of them know what the lease says. But 9 times out of 10, if not 10 out of 10, that lease is going to be in the landlord's favor. That's just how the so-called standard forms are drafted. Sometimes I deal with the standard forms. I meet clients where they are. So if that's what they're dealing with, then that's what I deal with. But in some larger clients, they're dealing with the same issues. So it's not a point of pride or shame. It's just like you said, like you didn't get into the business in order to negotiate leases. You got into the business to run your business, whatever that business may be, whether it's a salon or a bodega or appliance store or a supermarket or whatever, an office of some sort, whatever it may be. So
you certainly didn't. And I think that there needs to be more education around this for people so that and the other thing is, they're blind, but you don't even know.
Amen. That's why I use the term landmine, because you don't see it. It's below the surface. You don't even hear the click when you step on it, right? You only realize when it's too late and it's blown up. And now the landlord has hit you with a default notice, accelerated your rent so that now all the rent is due on that day. And it gets even better. In Pennsylvania, one of the few states in the United States where this is legal, and all the other states, I think it's Pennsylvania and Louisiana, I'm not quite sure about Louisiana, but definitely in Pennsylvania, there's something called a confession of judgment clause or provision that's in the lease, typically in this so-called standard lease. Confession of judgment means the landlord can go down to the courthouse with this lease in hand and a cover sheet that says the tenant is in default. I get a judgment against the tenant. Doesn't have to file a complaint that the tenant has an opportunity to respond to and defend itself. Just has to go to the court, file this piece of paper on top of the lease and say that the tenant is in default, and that the landlord will get a judgment against the tenant. So now the landlord has a judgment, in our example, $300,000 judgment against the tenant. And because we're talking small businesses, in all likelihood, the individual owner of that business, even with the LLC protection that person might have in place, in all likelihood, that individual owner signed a guarantee, whether they realized it or not.
Right.
And now that means they're personally responsible for that $300,000 judgment now. It's not like, oh, they're suing us. No, they have a judgment. They can start, coming after your bank account, your personal assets, your business assets. It's potentially a nightmare. So when I say, don't lose your business to leasing landmines, we're not, I was going to say something that I'm not supposed to say on these type of recordings, and we're messing around. That's for real. And I appreciate this opportunity in terms of education. You're absolutely right. It's not a point of shame or pride. It's just what you know and what you don't know. This just happens to be what I do. And I'm trying to get the word out through this type of publication or podcast. I was at an event the other night where I was on a panel, and we had this type of discussion in a different context, and just let small business owners know. I mean, I have all this information on this particular topic. Like, I'm not generally that smart, as you know, because you know me. But I do know this because this is what I've been doing for 27 years. I certainly should know it. Otherwise, I should go do something, go back to bartending, as they say. But, try to get the word out to educate. I've had all this information that I've gathered from fancy schools and firms and businesses, blah, blah. And I realized that I could bridge that information gap. And then the light bulbs go off. And they say, and even if you can't win the negotiation battle, at least you know what you're getting into.
At least you know.
At least you know. Like, this is a lot of times that
that's a big part of it. I mean, I said, like, you don't know.
Yeah. Hey, by the way, this lease says that you're responsible for the heating, ventilation, and air conditioning for the HVAC. What? That's a structural thing. That's the landlord. No, it's what the lease says.
Yeah, it does. I went through that whole thing with them. I said, well, because that's the fact. Like, you're responsible for it. I'm like, well, the thing's old, so how should I be responsible for something old in your building? And then you come up with a negotiation, like, okay, I'll be responsible for $1,000, up to $1,000 or whatever exactly. It is. But you have to understand all that. And yeah, you can be seriously blindsided, and it could be some serious consequences. And I'm sure that you have been through that. You have seen people come to you, and if they came to you before the fact.
Yes, because then I can at least translate the legalese into business terms that they can use to make informed decisions. And they can say, okay, I can live with that. Or, no, hell no, I'm not going to replace heating and ventilation and air conditioning. Is, obviously it goes throughout the premises, right? It's a system, right? It's a structural system. It should be a capital expense because it's a benefit. The reason why you don't want to do it, in addition to paying the money, is that it's a benefit for the landlord. Right now, you've improved that building for the next whatever the useful life is of the HVAC system, and that's a 5-figure expense. So unfortunately, I had that. Sometimes people do come to me in advance, and that was in the lease. That's a true example. And we said, well, we need to have an HVAC licensed, insured HVAC contractor come out and certify that this thing is in good working order. And the landlord said, oh, okay, well, I'll put in a couple of new things then, right? Because it wasn't in good working order, it turns out.
And that's the thing. They usually know too, right?
It's their building. Yeah.
They usually know what's going on. And that's a little bit, kind of not the right thing to do. No, it's not something of integrity would do to somebody.
Exactly. And again, it's not here to, neither one of us are here to bash landlords, but sometimes, it's, hey, business is business, right? If the tenant doesn't say, well, let's get someone out here and check to see what kind of condition this thing is in. If I'm going to be responsible for it, I want to know what kind of condition it's in, right? It's illogical. I mean, I'm not building any rockets here. Maria. It's like, but if you don't know, then you don't know. Like, and I say to clients, I look, I don't know the first thing about running a salon or whatever it is, whatever business that you're in. So it's not that I'm smarter than you. I just have different experience. That's why you have a team that you bring. You said accounting, legal, whatever it might be, marketing potentially.
Whatever it might be, you need to have your people. You need to have them in line. It's all part of the business. What do you see since you're right on if you're right on the boots on the ground with these commercial leases? What have you seen happening? We commercial retail over the last 4 years has been tough. After COVID, I think things are opening up. What is your perspective?
It's interesting to me because you would think that there has certainly been a lot of difficulty, since and during the pandemic, obviously for obvious reasons with the lockdowns and all the other things that went on and devastated so many retail and restaurant establishments. There definitely is. We're seeing a recovery from that, but it's kind of slow going because of the remote work environment. Because if you don't have that foot traffic as a retail establishment, then you don't have those customers coming in or those clients coming in. So you would think that landlords would be hungrier for good tenants, but they're also at the same time wary of whether or not this tenant is going to survive. Because the landlords, the landlords aren't there to fault the tenants and collect rent, accelerated rent. There's other ways to make a living. They'd rather have a good tenant and not a dark storefront, right? A dark storefront, meaning that there's no one there, is a recipe for disaster, right? Because you see it in the Northeast and at the what is the name of that mall? I can't remember the name of it now, but it's right on Cotman.
Roosevelt Mall.
Yeah, right. If people are drawn to vacuums, right? So if the storefront is empty, hey, this is a pretty good place to hang out. I can hang out in this little alcove. If I'm homeless, I can live in this little alcove. Potentially, I could use this alcove for different things that you wouldn't ordinarily use the alcove for, and then it needs to be cleaned out regularly. So it's not like landlords want to have the space empty, but they're wary and they want to have protections as well because they have. It's a ripple effect. It's if the tenant pays the rent to the landlord has to pay typically debt service, make loan payments to its lender because typically the landlord bought the building with some debt, and then they have to make payments, and they have to comply with the ever increasing number of labyrinthian regulations that the city has to offer on a regular basis. And with Alba Martinez coming in as the commissioner of commerce, director of commerce, I may be using the wrong term, and Javier Mojica working with her and others, they are trying to streamline the process and make it more user friendly for folks, but it's tough. It's tough because oftentimes these landlords are small business owners and they don't have wide margins either. So it's really about communication. It's the reason why we don't charge for conversations with clients. It's really about communication. It's communication with the clients to understand what their goals and aspirations are for their business, what they can and can't do, make sure they have a proper budget. Again, knowing what you don't know by having someone on your team explain it to you, and then conveying to the landlord in real world terms, hey, look, this is my concern. I don't want to be responsible, back to the HVAC example, I don't want to be responsible for a system that's about to fail because then I'm going to fail. Like I don't have that kind of money to replace it. And that's why I didn't buy a place, right? I don't want that responsibility. So so we need to make sure that the system is going to, ideally you'd want it to last, at least the length of the lease term,
Ideally.
at least, right? Because if you're like, you've been in this place for 9 years, right? In your case, right? You don't want to suddenly have to move to this place that you've established as your business home where, yeah, and people are used to seeing it, especially if it's retail where people, you have, hey, here comes Joe for his morning coffee or Jane for her whatever sandwich in the afternoon or whoever it may be. There's a flow and a rhythm and a relationship that you develop, and all of a sudden, boom, you're out on 30 days notice because the landlord decided whatever the landlord decided. So you do want to make sure that you have enough runway, and you balance that with not having, this giant lease for 15 years that now you have to be there, even though you want a bigger place or a smaller place or a different place or whatever, because your business is evolving. The fine line.
It's tricky. It's tricky. It's tricky, especially if you want to be able to buy a building. You have to factor in, because if you think about what you pay over the time, this is a whole nother conversation. But if you think about this, what you pay for rent per year for how many years, and you take that and you say, okay, I could have paid that rent to myself, and you save that. Then you think about the appreciation of a building over 2 decades. You have your building. Now the building is paid off, and there's your retirement money.
Amen. You're building institutional generational wealth for yourself and your family. And in the Latino community, oftentimes that's unheard of, particularly in other underserved communities. It's unheard of. We helped a woman do exactly what you just described. Ran a salon. She's the tenant, salt of the earth, great woman, work ethic, constantly working, and single mom, helping her family, kids, and she had no idea that her lease was month to month. She didn't even know what that meant. And then when I explained it to her, I translated the legalese for her. She was horrified. Fortunately, sometimes good begets good, and the solution there was that she was going to be able to buy the building. But that's a whole nother conversation, a whole nother can of worms. But the short of it is, it took a very, very long time and a lot of heavy lifting by a number of different people. But she now owns the building. She's paying herself rent. She has tenants upstairs. It's not like she's on easy street, because being an owner presents its own challenges. But now she's the owner.
That's fantastic. Now she can build real long-term wealth. You build it through, obviously. That's how everybody, in America, they have their wealth is in their home.
Yeah.
That's why we're such big proponents of home ownership. As a business owner, your future wealth is in owning your own bricks and mortar. Then you can do sublease. You can do leases. You can lease out some of your space, right? And then you construct that, and they come to you, and there's tremendous opportunity. You have to be creative. Be the solution.
Absolutely, you have to find the solution. It's not just about pointing out what the issues are, which we do a lot as lawyers. It's exactly right. It's having those conversations where you don't hear that meter ticking in the background because I'm not charging you for it. And we come up with the solution. We had a guy who was renting an appliance store on Torresdale. Same thing. I have never seen an individual as happy as this guy as when we closed and he purchased that building. He was beaming with his son. And normally the lawyer would pay for the closing lunch or dinner or whatever it is. I didn't dare. He was so excited. It was his show. He was beaming. It was amazing. It was such a good situation, and the pride and joy, and his son was there. Like, I can do this. Other people like, hey, this guy could do it. I could do it. And it breeds solutions, as you know, right? It's solutions are contagious. Once you have that mindset that, hey, okay, here's something of concern. How do we resolve this? It makes such a big difference.
It's all what it's about. Then that's the platform that we live our life from, is be the solution for not only for yourself, for your family, for your clients. And the only one who can be the solution is you. You have the power to change your own life by being the solution oriented. And instead of that other thing, which we see people do, which is the victim side, right? We can choose.
Yeah.
We can choose every day to get up and be the solution and find a way. And I love the old saying, where there's a will, there is a way. And whether you think you can, think you can, either way, you are right.
Right on. It's a mindset. It's not to say that it's not difficult. No one's saying yes. I didn't hear the word easy.
So I think, something about that, people always say, pick your hard. You know what? Being broke is hard. Not paying your effing bills is hard. Going to work every day and figuring out and running around 12 hours a day is hard too. I'd rather have that.
Right on.
Pick your hard. And, I look at it and I do something of a perspective. Like, it's hard being in a country that's at war, being in a country where you can't even, you don't have freedom. We're in the great USA. We have freedom. There's so many
Yeah.
places in the world that don't have that. They don't, places without running water.
Yeah. Just gonna say,
We're
no
spoiled.
water, no lights. Yeah.
We have everything.
Yeah. You see people. I do it myself sometimes. Just leave the water running.
Yeah,
People would kill for that water.
we have everything right
Yeah.
here. It's up to us individually, and up to us to be that person that changes a generation.
Absolutely
So,
right.
okay, got two real quick questions for you, Diaz. Number one, I'm going on like this is nothing related to this, but what is your guilty pleasure?
Guilty pleasure is probably pepperoni pizza.
I like pepperoni pizza. Yum.
I was just in New York yesterday, so I was thinking about pizza. I had some pizza
Yeah,
yesterday.
pizza's good, especially the pizza from Italy.
Yeah,
Okay,
right on, right.
yeah. Number two, for you personally, what are you most excited about for your future?
Scaling up Lair Diaz, or Latte Diaz, as people sometimes call it, so that I can help more business owners and provide small business owners and entrepreneurs, as I said, particularly in Latino and underserved communities, with what they need to succeed, to bridge that information gap nationally. So from Philly to New York, I'm already in New York, New Jersey, down to Florida, where there's a large Latino community, and then across this great nation of ours to help people and provide them with what they need to succeed.
Oh, I love it. Ambitious, yet all doable when we put ourselves surrounded by the right people.
Exactly.
So, thank you for being on the show today. We love our guests to come back. So, we'll have you come back into 2025 and you can give us an update on what's happening in the commercial leasing world and life. But appreciate it. God bless and have a great one.
Awesome. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. I would look forward to coming back. Have a great day.